Thank you, Josh. It's wonderful to be here, and I just think the world of text, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. And so let's get rolling. You know, I do a lot of reading, and as I do reading, there are things that catch me off guard, things that I feel like, how did we not know this, or how did I not know this as a parent? And so my hope is that my reading, and I've summarized it, means that you don't have to read all the books that I've read, and that we can cherry pick some of the stuff that I think, as a parent, I really wish that I had known years ago. So what we know is that parenting is hard. I think that's probably why you guys are here, is because parenting is hard. But I think there's a lot that happens in our society that makes it harder. We've got a mental health crisis in our kids, and this mental health crisis existed before COVID. You know, I think that we kind of see, oh, it goes back to COVID, but in the decade before COVID, rates of depression in kids rose more than 60%. And if we take a look, same decade, number of children and teenagers seen in emergency rooms with suicidal thoughts or attempts doubled. Now here's the thing, here's the one that really, as an educator, made me catch my breath. The suicide rate for children is 2 times higher when school is in session. It's not the weather, because it's higher for adults in the summer. And if we take a look, this is a graph, mental health emergency room visits by week in 2019 for kids. So take a look at how low it is. January 5th, what's January 5th? Winter break, right? And then look what happens. It skyrockets, peaking right around prom season, right about now, right? Prom season, you've got finals and everything else, and it plummets over the summer. And then right when August starts, it picks up again. And here's the thing that really is striking. Thanksgiving, just a couple days off, and look at the break kids get. And then boom, it pops right back up for the last 2 weeks and down. I don't know how we can look at this and not think school's got something to do with what's happening for our kids. And in many ways, it's pushing many kids to the edge of their ability to cope, and for some of them beyond that. And then same year, 2017, this struck me as somebody who works on the North Shore. Students in high achieving school were now named an at-risk group. Just attending a school that's high achieving puts kids at risk. What they found, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation named the top environmental conditions harming adolescent wellness, and we knew the first 3, poverty, trauma, discrimination, but there it is, this excessive pressure to excel. Children in high achieving schools can suffer significantly higher rates of anxiety, depression, and substance use, 3 to 7 times the national average. So it's stressful for our kids. But it's also, parents have never been more stressed. I'm not sure if you guys saw this, but the Surgeon General has about a 70-page report on the stress that parents have, that parental stress is a public health crisis now. So the question for me is, how did we get here? There's a public health parable that I really like and find helpful, and it goes something like this. There's 2 people, sitting by the Des Plaines River having a picnic. Who wouldn't have a picnic on the Des Plaines, right? So they're sitting there, and they look up and they see a child in the water drowning. And they dive in and they pull that child to safety, and they're exhausted. And they see 2 more kids in the water, and they dive back in, and they get those kids to safety. And when they look up, the river is filled with kids who need help. For me, it's a metaphor of the mental health crisis. So one of them dives in and starts pulling kids out, and the other one goes up on shore, and the one in the water says, "What are you doing? I can't save these kids on my own." And the one on shore says, "I'm going upstream. We got to figure out why these kids are falling in." And so my hope today is that we can begin to look upstream and see what is it that's at the core of this. And I want to talk about 4 myths, and I find these myths hard to separate from my own belief system. But as I looked at the data and at the research and did the reading, there's lots of things that, even though it doesn't make intuitive sense to me, I think that there's a lot of things that we're doing as parents, as educators, as community members that are increasing the stress that our kids experience. So the first myth is that money makes us happy. So there's this kind of this idea that there's this path to mental health and happiness and wellness for our kids. And it starts with, if you have money, you're happier, right? But in order to get money, you've got to have a good job, which means we got to go to an elite college, right? Which means you got to take a lot of AP classes and you got to start in the school play. Does this sound familiar at all? And then you got to excel in the lower grades and make your travel teams if you're going to make varsity, right? So middle school, higher levels of elementary school, then you got to get to an elite preschool, otherwise you won't get a good start, right? And then early childhood enrichment activities, that has to happen, right? Otherwise, you'll never get the start you need and you'll be behind in first grade, kindergarten, right? It's almost like we're creating resumes for our kids, isn't it? For us, so this is, anybody here ever used Baby Einstein? Like, we were in utero. We were like, we're going to get these kids' brains going before they're even born, right? And then we got them into Cherry Preschool, the premier preschool in Evanston, as far as we knew, right? Now, our kids were not terribly exceptional athletically, but what we want to do is get them into travel teams, right? And in order to make the travel team and excel in the travel team, you got to get them extra coaching, right? In the morning or in the evening, on weekends. They got to take AP classes. Then what do we do to make sure that they get into the best college? They got to take the training, right? This is all supposed to be a meritocracy, but the wealthiest kids end up having the most pressure, but also having to go and take all these classes so they can get higher SAT scores so they can get into the elite college. And then we try and hack it, right? We try and hack it by getting how many times they have to take the SAT, the Kaplan tests, and then we all know what happened when folks tried to hack this, right? It's interesting. When I was like my kids were in elementary school, we'd go to dinner parties and stuff, and we'd always ask, "What do your kids do?" It's almost like they have jobs, right? And you'd always hear, "Oh, there's on travel team. Oh, they're in the youth symphony orchestra. They're in ballet, right? They've got these recitals coming up." And our kids were remarkably unremarkable, and so it's like, oh, they like hanging out with their grandparents, right? But there's always a little bit of shame about that, right? Always the slowest kid on the AYSO soccer team, whatever it is, right? But then as you get older, and all of a sudden they're seniors, where's your child going to college? And my kids were, both bright in their own ways, and I can remember but they went to very unexceptional colleges in terms of selectivity. And I remember, even knowing all this data that I'm going to share with you, I still felt some shame, right? It's a little bit like, oh, but they're so smart, right? There's that kind of, oh, why would they be doing that, right? So I think that there's this happiness conspiracy, and it all starts with this idea that if we're happy, then if we've got a good income, if we're wealthy, we're going to be happy. Now, the interesting thing is Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton did this research, and this has been research that's been around for a while. And this is 2010, so I think this number's gone up a bit. But what they say is that $75,000, once a family reaches $75,000, there's not that much benefit to making any more money than that. What they find is that the happiness, like when you're worried and you're having to get basic needs met, but once you get the basic needs met in your family, and that's generally around 75,000, I think it's probably closer to 90,000 now for a family of four. But happiness doesn't increase. You could make 90,000, 900,000, 9 million, and the rates of happiness. Here's what the data really says. Did you experience happiness yesterday? Did not experience worry or sadness yesterday? Did not feel stressed yesterday? Like, there it is. It levels out. What they said is $75,000 is a threshold beyond which further increases in income no longer improve individuals' ability to do what matters most to their emotional well-being, such as spending time with people they like, avoiding pain and disease, and enjoying leisure. But that's the work. If we take a look at some other data just broadly, the richest countries in the world, so the US, there's lots of different ways you can measure this, but they're number one in the world by a lot over China in nominal GDP. I don't know what that is, but I assume it's, right? If there's an economist here, please explain, right? But it means we're wealthy, right? And we know that, right? But take a look. For young people below 30, where do we rank in happiness in the world? Well, we're not in the top 25. Uh-oh. We're not in the top 50. There we are. There we are, right below Ecuador and the Dominican, and Honduras has us beat by about 5 spots, right? We're right above Malaysia, Vietnam, and Albania, right? So this idea, and I still find it hard to wrap my head around, and it doesn't protect us from mental health. In fact, I think in many ways, and the data on the pressure that we experience in schools, I think in many ways, we're exposing kids to mental health with our wealth. If you take a look, Northbrook, Illinois, just thought I'd pull some stats for you guys. Northbrook is, the median income is 2 times the national average, and Northbrook is the 9th wealthiest town in Illinois. And it's got 3 partial hospital programs for kids within 4 miles. I don't think anybody else has that kind of concentration, which means that kids here, even though it's such a wealthy community, there's a lot of mental health suffering happening. And you guys know this. You wouldn't be here, I don't think, if that wasn't the case. Even things like winning the lottery gives a short-term boost. Yes, people are happier the year after they win the lottery. But within a year, studies suggest that after a year or so, winners often return to their previous baseline level of happiness. We think that money is the answer, and so we've worked harder and harder and harder to get it. So what is the answer to happiness? So these guys did this research, and it's they took over the Grant study. The Grant study is a study, they started in 1938, and they started looking at men at Harvard, and then they included it to include men from Boston generally, 19-year-olds. What they wanted to do is figure out what makes people happy and healthy. And so they determined to follow them throughout their lives and check in with them every year, and then every 5 years. They are still checking in with the ones that are still alive, and they're checking in with their families. So this has been years and years and years, 80 years that they've been doing this. And they've got the data just continues to show up in the same ways. The strongest predictor for people to maintain their happiness and health throughout the course of their lives was having relationships with satisfying levels of quality and warmth. Oftentimes, our effort to pursue the money means that we're spending less and less time with our kids and at home. So George Valiant, he ran it for 3 decades, I think. He said the 75 years and $20 million expended on the Grant study points to a straightforward 5-word conclusion: happiness is love, full stop. So even Jim Carrey says, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see it's not the answer, right? So the reality is that happiness is about the wealth of our relationships, not about our money. It's easy to forget that. It's easy for me to forget. I'm like, oh, if I just make enough money, I'm going to be able to get that, and then I'll be happier, right? So myth number 2, selective schools lead to happiness and success. This is something that I think is rampant in our schools, is in particular students. Everybody really sees a selective college as their ticket to success. So I just want to take a look at some data around this. So Fortune 100 CEOs, how many went to the Ivy League and how many had no diploma, right? About the same. If we take a look at the CEOs of the top 10 gross revenues in 2024, there are 2, Princeton and Tufts. This is Jeff Bezos, of course. But look at all the other ones have selectivity rates of 50% or more. Now, this is Zuckerberg. He didn't get a degree, so maybe he belongs up there because he got into Harvard, but he didn't graduate from Harvard. I think he was only there for a little while, right? Let's take a look at MacArthur Genius Grants. Among other places, you can get them. People at Western Michigan, Western Illinois, Illinois Wesleyan, Southern Illinois have MacArthur Genius Grants. You don't have to go to these elite colleges to have these opportunities. One of the things that's interesting to me is how U.S. News and World Reports has shifted how we all see the value of college. They were a struggling magazine until they did this, and now everybody knows about the U.S. World Report. This is in the mid 1980s, and what they did was all of a sudden they created these measures that have nothing to do with happiness or health, but they created these measures to say this is what makes a school a top-ranked school, and one of the big ones was their admissions rates. So, how do schools hack admission rates? So they want to get higher on the U.S. News and World Report. So that means they've got to reduce their admissions rates. So what they do? Anybody have juniors or seniors or sophomores? Yeah. Have you been getting notes from school from different colleges? What they'll do is they will attract to reject. So Ivies and other schools will send out, say, apply to us, knowing that the kids that they're sending them to are not going to get accepted. But they encourage them to apply as a way of reducing their acceptance rates, right? So if we take a look at in the last, between 2006 and 2018, admissions rates for the 50 most competitive schools dropped by 45%. Can you imagine 45%? We're saying, kids, you should apply to these places, and then we're making it harder for them to get in. UCLA, in 1985, there's a 75% acceptance rate. In 2025, 9%. We're pushing kids to believe they need to be in a highly selective school in order to be successful, but then we're making it significantly harder for them to get in. And they feel like failures if they don't. So be careful what you wish for if you do get in. You know, the interesting thing, so extreme are the admission standards now that kids who manage to get into elite colleges have, by definition, never experienced anything but success. The result is a violent aversion to risk. You have no margin for error, so you avoid the possibility that you'll ever make an error. It's so hard. The number of kids with straight A's all through high school, playing sports, volunteering, and still not getting into highly competitive schools. It's shocking to me. There's a psychologist. He does a lot of work on happiness. He's a Harvard professor, and so he teaches freshmen psychology at Harvard. And the first class, he always looks out at them and he says, "Listen, half of you are in the bottom 50% for the first time in your life. How does that feel? You've never been here before, right? All of a sudden, there's this pressure." But, so, students who learn more in elite colleges, right? So if you get in, you're going to learn more. True? So little evidence suggests that selectivity is related to measures of students' self-reported gains in learning. The weight of evidence simply does not support students' or policymakers' belief that selective admissions process enhances student learning. So what does enhance student learning? Any ideas? Time spent studying. The kids who study learn more, no matter what school you go to. This is true regardless of institution and for all kinds of students. There's no evidence that students' learning will suffer for attending a less selective college. But this is what gets it, Lisa, this is what gets it. So what are the keys to a selective college and a selective college experience? One, taking a course with a professor who makes learning exciting, working with professors who care about them personally, right? Finding a mentor who encourages you to pursue your personal goals, working on a project across several semesters, participating in an internship that applies classroom learning, and being active in extracurricular activities. This is what it is. But this is where it gets tricky because colleges are so focused on U.S. News and World Reports and getting the flat screen TVs in the dorm rooms and getting their admissions. The other thing about getting the admissions rates so low, the acceptance rate so low, they are identifying themselves by the number of people they reject. It's such an interesting. That's how we get our status, is by rejecting more people. There's something so wrong about that to me. But only 14% of graduates felt supported by professors who cared about them. Only 6% strongly agreed they had a meaningful internship or job. And only 3% had all these factors. To me, this is what we should be looking for as parents, and this is what I would be hoping for, that colleges would say, this is what we need to be doing. All right, so, but what about jobs after college, right? Clearly, if you go to Harvard, you're going to have a better job. Let's take a look at the data, right? 2014 Gallup-Purdue's annual report found no relationship between college selectivity and workplace engagement and general well-being. But what about the money? They must be making more money, right? Dale and Kruger found that college selectivity had no effect on long-term earnings. 10 years, so they did this in an interesting way. What they did was they got all the people, they compared everybody who was accepted to an elite college. And then there were people who went and then people who had to stay home and go to a community college, go to state school, whatever that is. And they compared those two populations. That's how they got this. Fascinating, right? So they got accepted, but they just couldn't go. No change in how much they made. 10 years after graduation, former students of selective colleges reported lower job satisfaction than students from less selective colleges. Students from more selective colleges are more likely to feel underpaid. I went to Yale and I'm making as much as you, right? There's something wrong about this. So in summary, job satisfaction, general well-being, learning, and income are all important outcomes of college, but research shows no relationship between selectivity and learning, job satisfaction, or general well-being. Tell that to your kids. It's hard, right? It's really hard. Students who attend selective colleges do not learn more, make more money, or have better careers, period. Okay. The third myth. High achievement in high school is essential for success. So let's take a look at this. So this hits home for me because my son, I can still remember kind of sniffing that something was wrong for him when he was in 8th grade. Literally sniffing something was wrong. I woke up and there was burning at 3 a.m. Something was burning. He was in 8th grade. And I come downstairs and sure enough, there's smoke coming out of the oven. And there he is pulling paper that's browning in the oven. He's trying to make it look like a historical document, right? And so I'm like, he's pulling his first all-nighter in 8th grade. So he's, everything came easy to him right up until he needed to do work that required more planning and other things, right? And so elementary school came easy to him. If he just could sit in class and take the test, he'd be fine. If he had to organize his work, he had executive functioning challenges, right? And school's not kind to kids with executive functioning challenges. I'll tell you that much. But that's when I knew that all of a sudden we were in some trouble, the first of many all-nighters that he had to pull. So one of the things that happened in 2002 was the No Child Left Behind Act was signed. And I think it was well-meaning. There's a lot of reasons why it didn't work. But what it did was we focused in on academic achievement. And we're going to measure student success. We're going to measure teachers by the test scores their kids get. We're going to measure schools, districts. All of this becomes a part of how we see whether or not we have a successful school. I think even real estate agents get into it, right? Like because highly selective schools and all of a sudden you get more money, property taxes go up, all of these things. Everybody's invested in this. There's a Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. They use this, I like this, there's an example of, they wanted to begin to figure out who are the best cardiac surgeons so they could pair them with the most vulnerable people. And so they started rating cardiac surgeons. And so all the 5-star cardiac surgeons, guess what they stopped doing? Operating on the most vulnerable people because they're going to ruin their rating. It totally undermined what was happening. And the same thing is true. Schools failing to make adequate yearly progress went up in the heart of NCLB. So it didn't work, right? But in the meantime, school became really demanding because we were wanting to push academic rigor. School has never been so stressful for kids. And so there's a hidden cost to this rigor. I just want to share a couple thoughts about that. So this part of our brain, this prefrontal cortex that manages our executive functioning, allows us to do all the basic building block skills that we need in order to fully be successful in school. It's not fully developed until we're 25. And it doesn't develop at the same rate, but look at all the things that it does. Impulse control and inhibition. It keeps me from looking at my phone and being on social media while class is happening. Emotional regulation, the ability to initiate tasks, especially non-preferred tasks, the ability to persist when things get hard, to transition from one activity to another, to have empathy, to focus our attention, to plan. It helps us, I like this, it says it helps us do, Robert Sapolsky is a neuroscientist, he says it helps us to do the harder thing when it's the right thing to do, right? It helps us to write the outline before we, it helps us to sit down and focus instead of text my friend, right? So these executive functioning skills are essential. So, if we take a look at the basic bell curve of kids at risk, generally, we try and hit, what we're teaching and work our curriculum towards the midpoint. And we're always going to have some kids who are struggling at this end, just because that's about 15%. And then oftentimes you've got other kids who are more bored, but generally we hit most of the kids in the middle. But with NCLB, what we did was we started pushing. We expect kids, I think we expected, like my son Matthew, when he was in 8th grade, was expected to do things that I was expected to do when I was a junior or senior, right? But it doesn't mean, just because we have these expectations, doesn't mean that these skills develop any quicker, right? And so we're asking kids to do things many kids' brains aren't able to do. My daughter, it came easy for her, right? Because her prefrontal cortex, I think, was fully developed in the womb. I'm convinced. Like, she came out and everything was easy for her, right? But it's harder for many kids. And so we've got kids at risk. These are the kids that are going to be at risk. But all of a sudden, we got more kids who are going to struggle to keep up. And what we know is that when our skills don't match the demands, that's stressful. Have you ever been in a situation where you're asked to do things you can't do? Just how hard that is. It feels shaming. And imagine 6 hours a day for that many years. In our 8th grade, in our middle schools and early high school, we've got kids, 14 years old, who are 6 feet tall, facial hair, body odor, right? And that there's walking down the hallway with kids are 2 years away from puberty, right? But we never say to this kid, oh, let's put the kid in puberty, let's put him on the offensive line of the football team. We'd say he just hasn't hit his growth spurt yet. But when it comes time, when we're asking kids whose prefrontal cortex isn't as fully developed, we start calling them lazy, right? We'd never have a behavior plan to grow facial hair, right? And yet this is what we're doing for kids is, we need a behavior plan to get you to organize your work. It's just that it just hasn't developed yet. My buddy talks about developmental empathy. He coined this term. He says we've got to match the demands we place on our kids with their brain's development, not with their age. And when we're asking kids to do so much more than their brains are able to do, it causes stress. I think that the focus on rigor has undermined engagement for a lot of students. If we take a look at the industrial arts programs, one of the things we got rid of was industrial arts programs. So kids who didn't fit the basic model of sitting and focusing and reading and writing at a desk, and they wanted to get in and use their hands and move around more, 25% of students were enrolled in industrial arts programs in 1980. Only 5% now. 20% of kids, all of a sudden school's a different fit for them. And it's crazy because there's a shortage of skilled workers in the trades, right? 65% of high school students say they're checked out and they feel like there's nothing they can do about it. I couldn't believe this. 26% of students now are in Illinois in 2023 to 24 were chronically absent. More than a quarter of them chronically absent. And so for college-bound kids, what we're doing, the stakes are higher. We've created this scarcity, so they feel that the stakes are higher. And so perfectionism in children has doubled over the last few decades. And perfectionists, they may ace school, but they're no better than their colleagues at work. They perfect the art of following. And this is the challenge, is achieving excellence in school often requires mastering old ways of thinking. Building an influential career demands new ways of thinking. You gotta be ready to take a risk, to step out, try new things. It's harder for them. I like this. This is, I got a 2.4 GPA my first semester in college. Thought maybe I wasn't cut out for engineering. Today I've landed 2 spacecraft on Mars and now I'm designing one for the moon. Not bad, right? STEM is hard for everyone. Grades ultimately aren't what matter. Curiosity and perseverance are. But what we've done in so many ways is we've created an achievement addiction for kids. Anyone hear of the hedonic treadmill? So it's this constant pursuit of achievement. And the reason why they call it a treadmill is, number one, it's exhausting. But you're working hard and there's no end. You're kind of in the same place. The hedonic treadmill or achievement addiction, the human tendency. So what happens is when we achieve something, we feel a temporary increase in happiness, right? But then all of a sudden we return to baseline afterwards. You get a new car, right? That new car smells great. You hop in it, it's kind of fun. And then all of a sudden the new car smell wears off, right? And then it's just a car. And this is what happens with almost every kind of achievement. We start with a desire, right? I want to get into AP classes, then I got to get 5 on AP classes, and then I've got to get do, instead of 4 AP classes as a junior, I've got to do 5 as a senior. I've got to get into Harvard. I've got to get into an Ivy. I get into the Ivy. I've got to be in the top 10%. I got to get into the best law school, right? And then I've got to get the best clerkship, and then I've got to get the best. This is what happens because they have this desire and then they get it. But then their brains adapt to it. And it's like, okay, I'm not happy anymore. I've got to achieve something else. This is a natural part of what happens. We chase achievement, but we get nowhere because there's always more to achieve. And once we define ourselves by what we achieve and not who we are, then all of a sudden, we have to constantly pursue achievement. You continue to achieve, but still feel empty and left wanting. I remember my daughter, like she talked about this. She says, like getting something, achieving something when you are on the hedonic treadmill is like winning a pie eating contest. And the prize is more pie. Right? You got into Harvard, now you got to get into now you got to get the best internship. You've got to get the best this and that. So the reality is that our focus on achievement undermines children's mental health. All right, the last myth is self-esteem is the key to wellness. So in the 1990s, there was a lot of interesting research where that came out and it said self-esteem is the most important thing for kids' wellness. And so that research became proliferated and we all believed it. And it's still true. The problem is that we were trying to hack self-esteem. So we create this self-esteem generation, right? We tried to hack self-esteem by helping our children avoid any kind of distress. Because all of a sudden in our minds, we're not the researchers, in our minds, if our kid's unhappy, then that's damaging their self-esteem. And they can't be unhappy. So I've got to make sure that I alleviate their distress, right? So we've become, as a generation of intensive parents. Intensive parenting, mothers and fathers overextend their time and money curating their child's life in hopes of maximizing their child's future. Does that sound familiar at all? Right? In the past 40 years, we actually have doubled the amount of time we spend with our kids. And our kids are experiencing mental health problems at unprecedented rates. Right? You do the math. Less of us is better, honestly. And that's in spite of the fact that we've got more two-income families. So not only there's way less time for adults for themselves, right? And this is what the Surgeon General was talking about. We are stressing ourselves out trying to do this. We are working harder and parenting harder than ever before. And part of this is like this belief that we've got to curate this or we're never going to leave them unsupervised, right? So we have these things called play dates. I remember the first time I heard it, I'm like, that's kind of a weird name, play dates. I'm like, I want these kids, my kid, he's only 3 and he's going to be on a date. Like, it just didn't make sense to me, right? But take a look at this. I took a look at this on Google, the use of the word play date since 1980. Almost never used, and then boom, there it goes. All of a sudden, we started organizing our kids' social lives, right, in ways we never had before. We do the same thing in sports, right? I like this Take a look at this. Little League Baseball has changed a lot over the last 40 years. This guy's like, this is me in Little League. This is my son. Right? So we're investing more and more. If you're on a travel team, you got to spend every weekend in Des Moines and Battle Creek and all of these different places, right? I have families say, "Oh yeah, we can't go on vacation over the summer. We got, my 8-year-old is the backup second baseman on his travel team." Right? And so all of a sudden, and what does this say to the child? It's like, oh, my baseball is more important than anything else in this family, right? This is where my family spends my money. This is where we spend our time. We drag an 11-year-old sister along, right? We do this with music, get all sorts of enrichment activities, right? We continue to add. And I think we've got this belief that more is better. More travel teams, wow, you're really a great athlete, right? And we often say, how could I tell my kid no? He made 3 travel teams. But we do it all the time. What if they wanted 3 ice cream sundaes every night? We'd say, no, that's too much of a good thing. There is too much of a good thing, right? Our intensive parenting can have unintended consequences. Number one, we become more overwhelmed and anxious. We deprive students and children of some very important things: the ability to tolerate discomfort, the ability to develop a sense of personal competence. If we're solving all their problems, they can't develop that competence themselves, and the belief that they can solve their own problems. These are the keys to developing resilience, and we're taking them away from kids. When we emphasize self-esteem, we can make them feel okay when they really should be worried. There are things kids should be worried about, right? It's okay to worry about things. They're going to have to learn how to cope with their worry, right? And we increase their sense of entitlement and reduce their willingness to work hard because it's uncomfortable. And when we save them from discomfort, then all of a sudden, they don't want to step into discomfort anymore. The benefits of not supervising your kid is they'll get bored. They'll be engaged in more conflict. They'll get into more fights on the block, but then they'll figure out how to resolve those, right? They'll make more mistakes. And then they'll figure out, what do I do when I make a mistake? I found out it's okay. They get more bruises and more cuts because no one's there to catch them. Rafts of research prove that intensive parenting mainly serves to burn out parents while harming children's competence and mental health. But we don't read this research. In 2018, 75% of parents responded, rated various intensive parenting scenarios as very good or excellent. And less than 40% said the same about scenarios showing a non-intensive approach. So it's part of our, it is interesting. I can remember when Anna, my daughter, was 8, I think, she was at a friend's house about 2-3 blocks away. And I remember saying to the parent when it was time to come home, yeah, you can just send her home. She says, oh no, I couldn't. And then I thought, oh no, I couldn't. I'm like, oh no, yeah, that's right. It is dangerous, right? Like I couldn't wrap my head around it. This anxiety is contagious, not just among parents, but with kids. Anxious parents seeking to insulate their children from risk and danger are unintentionally sharing that anxiety with their kids. Parents, whether they mean to or not, seem to be making the problem worse. Young people's increasing fear of not being perfect was driven in part by what they thought their parents wanted. Their success or failure can become a reflection on us, right? If they're polite at a party, it's a reflection on us. If they're rude, if they get into trouble, if they don't do their homework, it's a reflection on us. And all of a sudden, and all the work that I've put into curating this kid, right? But by emphasizing self-esteem, we deprive our kid of their most important developmental task, and that is to build resilience. So can we think about building resilience instead? And resilience comes from experiencing stress. You can't develop resilience without experiencing stress. And this is the part that I think is so problematic for our kids. There's a great example of this, the Biosphere 2. Anybody hear of the Biosphere 2? So they created this amazing environment that was supposed to be the ideal environment for growing things. And they had palm trees in there. So they drew these palm trees went up, and then they started falling over when they hit a certain height. Much much lower, much shorter height than what they would do in nature. Any idea why? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There is no wind, and so the wood wasn't stressed.
Exactly. There's no wind, and the wind creates a root systems, and it creates wood systems inside the trunk that keeps them stable. Right? When kids don't experience wind, when they don't experience stress, they can't develop that. And I like what Lisa DeMore says. She says there's an important connection. Is the stress uncomfortable or unmanageable? And I think we often think that stress is unmanageable for our kids when it's just uncomfortable. We don't want to be neglectful when they are experiencing toxic stress. But most and almost all of their stresses are going to be about discomfort. I saw this on Facebook. A 3-year-old. I love this 3-year-old's message about resilience. The mom says, "Whenever I get discouraged and want to quit something, I remember the words of my then 3-year-old after she puked carrots all over the living room floor. I'm going to need more carrots." Isn't that good? So here's the thing, and I think those of you who work in middle schools or have middle school kids, I think they're particularly vulnerable because what happens is they are evolutionarily, biologically needing to separate from parents, and many of them don't know how to navigate the world without their parents. And so I think we're seeing a lot of kids in 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade really struggling because of that. So this is a nice, Alison Gopnik writes about this. The idea of, can we be gardeners instead of carpenters? Intensive parents are carpenters, hammering children into a particular shape, one stroke at a time. Gardening parents pour their labor into creating preconditions of love, safety, and stability for their kids to grow in potentially unpredictable ways. You know, I think that we try and curate their lives so it goes like this, but what success really looks like is that, isn't it? And can we tolerate our kids going backwards and falling down in order to get there? And part of this is, can we model this ourselves? Can we talk about our anxieties? Can we talk about our failures, our struggles, our weaknesses, and our insecurities? How many times do we say to kids, "Oh, you should tell us about these things"? How often do they hear, "I really pissed someone else off at work today," right? I embarrassed myself in a meeting today. If we want them to talk about it, we've got to talk about it first. I found this very humbling because I have a hard time talking about my weaknesses at the dinner table. I don't want to think about them. And yet then we have kids not really able to talk about what's hard for them. I like what James Baldwin says, children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they've never failed to imitate them. We've got to show them it's okay to talk about these things. The other thing, Adam Grant writes about this, children pay attention to our attention. Where we focus tells them what we prize. What messages are we really sending? So there's some interesting data on this too. Perceived parental criticism and unreachable standards predicts child depression. But we're not aware of the kind of pressure we're putting on kids. 90% of parents report that their top priority for their child is that they're caring. Then they ask the kids of these parents. What they found is 81% of children report that their parents value achievement over caring. They'd rather have me get an A than, help my neighbor break their lawn or whatever. So what we say is, and we've all said this, right? All I care is that you do your best. But then we wince when they get a bad test score. Right? Oh, we're going to have to get you a tutor, right? Grades are not important to me, but then put the straight A report card on the fridge and tell friends he's doing so well in school, we're so proud of him, right? We get the I'm an honor roll student at Glenbrook North, right? You can go to any college you want, I just want you to be happy. But then we talk about the competitive and elite colleges while skipping the good ones. Oh, did you see that your cousin got into Cornell? Right? It's important because we're sending messages all the time. Notice how often your comments and conversations have to do with achievement. Just begin to notice that. We're all part of this system. And I think when you begin to shine a light on it ourselves, you'll find that even though you're not meaning to send these messages, we're sending these messages. So what's the alternative? When our kids are struggling, I like this. Don't just do something, stand there. Right? Just be present with them. You don't have to fix it. Let them know it's going to be okay. What are you going to do about this? Right? This is a hard one. Just being present. I think what it means is dialing several things up, displaying love instead of approval over being able to make the team, validating feelings, giving consistent quality time, which is hard to do when you're trying to get 3 kids to 3 different travel teams and you're not sure whether you need the helmets or the shin pads, right? Like that's, it also involves turning some dials down, doing their homework, rescuing them from their distress, when they get bored, feeling responsible for their boredom, right? Solving their child's problems for them, becoming involved in their social lives, right? And then some just need constant adjusting. Enrichment activities are good. Too many enrichment activities are hard. I had a parent just the other day, she said, I've got a child with ADHD, and Wednesdays are hard because he goes to school all day, and then he's got therapy, and then soccer, and then baseball, right? And so it's like, how can we change that so that, because we need these things that we can engage in, but we also need downtimes. And when that means that not just is he not at home having dinner together, it means that mom or dad is not, that nobody in the family is getting this downtime. And these dinners are important. The research on dinners is powerful. Families who sit down for at least 5 times, I think it's 5 times a week, and have family dinners, the students have increased vocabulary, achievement, and reading. Want to get their achievement scores up? Have dinner as a family. Their empathy and social skills go up. Why? Because they're watching us model these things. They're watching us listen. They're watching us respond, right, to one another. And decreased suicide, substance abuse, depression, aggression, and sex. Not bad, right? And I don't think it's about dinner. So there's some families who can't, they work double shifts or whatever that may be. It's about having intentional time together as a family every week and multiple times a week. Can we make sure we carve this time out? And it's not about the broccoli, right? But what happens when we're sitting down, and even something as simple as grace has a lot of, and whether you're religious or not, it does a lot of things. So when we hold hands, we're touching. The oxytocin gets generated. This feel-good hormone. When we're thankful, gratitude is a huge impact on mental health, right? Let's say oftentimes there's a moment of quiet. Mindfulness, we know how important that is. Just these little practices, but can we be intentional about them? So the reality is that children actually benefit from tolerable stress. So, one of the things that I thought about was, I talked about the things that cause stress, and I'm not going to get into this too much, but I'm fascinated by this term consilience. You guys know what consilience is? It's when you've got different theories from different places coming together and saying the same thing, right? And so there's consilience with what is helpful for kids' development. And what they all talk about is these universal human needs. What are the needs kids have? And so self-determination theory, this is a big one. They need to have a sense of competence, autonomy, and relatedness, right? Take a look at motivation theories. How do we get kids to motivate? Again, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. It's a circle of courage. We used this when I was at North Shore Academy. How do we build resilience? This is a model of resilience. You need to have a sense of belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. Can you see how all these things are coming together? When we think about what's most important for our kids, there's remarkable consistency. They need to be in communities where they feel a sense of connection and belonging. They need to be engaged in things, they need to be engaged in things that you want to get better at something, not because you're going to achieve something, but because you love the process of learning, right? It's not about being the first chair violin. It's about mastering that song and figuring out, oh, this is how it works, right? this sense of autonomy, having kids at different developmental levels, giving them the freedom and not hovering over them. And then this sense of purpose, that what I'm doing has meaning, that I have meaning, that I matter, that these are the things that we know are important for development. And so what we want to do is when our kids are struggling, how can we see, when we talked about the circle of courage, it's like, where's the circle broken? When they're struggling, is it that they're struggling with autonomy, that they're becoming defiant with us, right? Okay, that's an autonomy issue. They're bored or they're not engaged. That's a mastery issue. Let's dig in there. All right, so something unexpected happened in this. I've only got an hour or two left. Is that okay? I could talk about this stuff for a long time. So COVID hit, and everybody had to stop everything they were doing, and everything shut down. And there's a researcher that for decades had been studying kids in high achieving schools. And so she was studying these kids in the spring of 2020, and she said the well-being of these students actually improved. Not that they were happy, but their well-being improved. They weren't happy that they couldn't play lacrosse this spring, right? But their well-being improved. As classes and exams were canceled, grading moved from pass-fail to and extracurricular activities ceased, they reported lower levels of stress, anxiety, and depression compared with 2019. And I found it, I was in my private practice. Kids would say, I hate online learning, but I love the fact that I don't have homework every night. When I come home, my parents, my parents would always ask me, what's your homework? And then I'd have to get, and now they're like, what do you want to do? You want to walk the dog, right? You want to play a game? It was totally different. Kids got more sleep during COVID. One of the interesting statistics is that in 1980, kids got an hour more sleep than in 2010. This is before smartphones made it into bedrooms, right? And that's a huge difference if we're thinking about symptoms of mental health, right? ADHD, obesity, behavior problems, academics, and social skills all plummet with 1 hour less of sleep every night. All of a sudden, schedules got clear. Like, we started having family meals for the first time. For 4 months, we had family meals. And now we're still doing it, right? But it was like, oh, this is what it's like, right? But here's the thing, is that kids aren't the only ones stressed. We're stressed, right? So I think about this and I thought, what we think is the ideal success for a kid in school these days, it would be like me going to my wife, Kathy, and saying, hey, I'll tell you what, I've got a plan for this year. I'm going to wake up early and I'm going to go swimming every morning from 5:30 until 7. And then I'm going to work straight through because I want to get this promotion, and I'm going to work straight through lunch. And then I'm going to get out and, Josh and I are starting a band, and we're going to, we're going to play some gigs on the weekends. And so we're going to practice every day until about 7:30. We'll come home. We're not going to be able to sit down and have dinner with everybody, but I'm going to take a meal and go right to my office, and then I'm going to finish up email. I'll go to bed about midnight and start it all over again the next day. What do you think my wife would say? You're crazy, and the divorce papers will be waiting for you there, right? Like, this is not healthy. And yet, what do we think, right? Kids get the morning coaching or early practice. They take an extra, they want to take an extra AP class, so they work right through lunch. Then they've got the play that night. Then they've got 3 hours of homework, right? And then we say, that's what an amazing kid this is. And what I say is, what an amazing pressure they're experiencing, right? So we had this for a little while, and then we blew it. These improvements were short-lived. Beginning in the fall of 2020, as schoolwork ramped back up, the mental health of adolescents returned to pre-pandemic levels or worse. Right? In fact, we were more anxious about it. So we, in many ways, we wanted them to catch up, not just do what they were doing before, but play catch up, right? But COVID shined a light on our children and our community. David Foster Wallace gave the commencement address at Kenyon College in 2005, and he told a story that I think fits. He says, there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way who nods at them and says, morning, boys, how's the water? And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, what the hell's water? The immediate point of the fish stories, the most obvious, ubiquitous, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. So my hope today is that this starts a dialogue, right? About the ways we are unintentionally creating stress for our kids and for ourselves in ways that undermine rather than support the wellness and success and happiness and health we're hoping for our kids. You know, for a while, for about 4 or 5 months, we got out of the water and we saw what could happen. So now that we know, what do we do?